Hi, everybody. I'll give you a moment to connect to sound. Hello. Hello
Hi.
and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1335th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Rachel Rose and Charlotte Kent. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges that here in New York, we're on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Rachel and Charlotte. Rachel Rose works across film, painting, sculpture, and drawing. Her practice addresses how the landscapes from which stories emerge affect how they're told and reveals the surreality latent in everyday experience. She's presented solo exhibitions internationally, and her work is held in major public collections, including those at Tate Modern, the Hessel Museum of Art, Bard College, among others. And our host today, Associate Professor of Visual Culture at Montclair State University, Charlotte Kent, is an editor at large for The Rail and a contributor to assorted books on art and technology, including as co-editor of Contemporary Absurdities, Existential Crises in Visual Art, co-author of Midnight Moment, A Decade of Artists in Times Square, and editor of Generation to Generation. She's the recipient of grants from NEH and Google Art and Machine Intelligence, with a forthcoming book on contemporary art and techno absurdity. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Charlotte to get us started.
Hi, thank you, Chloe and the Rail team. Thank you all for joining us. Rachel, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Uh, you know, I wanted to share with the audience, we'll have some of the images from the show that's currently at Gladstone going as we're talking, but I sort of envision this a little bit as, if you'll permit me, like story time with Rachel. Um, Especially as Chloe described, because of your interest in how landscapes tell stories and storytelling in your practice overall, it just seemed like a nice way to get us going and a way to have a conversation um, that could just go in whatever direction stories and conversations go. So with that, Rachel, welcome. Um, the slides will just be going as we chat, and when one of us decides to like talk about one of them in particular, we'll pause, but you'll see them moving just as we're chatting, and that's intentional. So I guess I would start this show at Gladstone, Rachel, called The Rest. Sort of stems from this biblical story of the flight into Egypt. So maybe you could just start off by sharing with the audience the kind of basis of that story as you have kind of taken it.
Sure. First of all, Charlotte, thank you so much for doing this together. Thank you, Joshua and Chloe and the Brooklyn Rail. I'm so honored to be here. So thanks for having me. Um, yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about the allegory of the rest on the flight into Egypt. It's actually not specifically in the Bible, but it's been imaged so much for so long that it essentially is. It's obviously something that does happen in the Bible, but it's not illustrated or described as what I'm about to say. Um, so it's a moment when Mary, Jesus, and Joseph are fleeing King Herod's army. And they're running basically across the landscape to safety in Egypt. And the painting, uh, the allegory has been depicted in so many different ways, but it tends to include um, some kind of essential symbols. One of them is in the background. Often there is a field of wheat that is newly sprouted up over in a village in the near distance. And behind that field of wheat is King Herod's army, who are chasing Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. And then in the foreground, usually Mary sits there breastfeeding her 3-day-old infant, Jesus. And Joseph is usually off to the side, either by a tree or in a kind of little forest bed or something, looking for food for them. And actually, usually he's beneath either a pear or a peach or an olive tree, and the branch of the tree is kind of bending down for him in a unnatural way. Um, at Mary's feet often are depicted herbs. I always interpreted them as like herbs for producing breast milk, that sort of like magically grow right there as she's sitting there. And usually, almost always, there's a kind of forest edge on either side of her, one side or the other. So there's kind of like civilization, a field of wheat, Joseph in a tree, some herbs, sometimes a stream of water that's not moving. So it should be like a river when we should see rushing water, but the water is still, and then the forest. And it's kind of unclear if they're about to enter the forest on their journey or if they just came from the forest. I always felt like the implication was they came from civilization and they're about to go full into nature. But that's sort of the allegory.
Since you just mentioned like some of the common visual references, I'll just mention some of the really famous paintings that some people may know or remember from art history class. Or so, Giotto makes one, Bartolomeo makes one, Caravaggio, Correggio, Titian. So like those are some of the sort of big kind of often included in an art history class or something like that. Um, and so it's got this really interesting history of depiction and whatnot, which is like part of why I think, you have these visual illusions that you could even sort of string together for us in this way. Um, and I'll get back to like the time period of when this like depiction starts to become prominent or whatever. But I guess to start with, what got you interested in this story?
Yeah, so I was doing a show in, I want to say 2021, in Brussels, at an institution called CC Strombeek. And I was thinking about how to install the show and what I was going to put in the show. And I thought, okay, well, I'm in like a Flemish landscape. Let me do some thinking and reading about Flemish painting. And I landed on this painter, kind of considered in some art historical modes like the first landscape painter, um, named Joachim Patinier. He painted very few paintings, tiny, and a few of them depicted the flight on the Rest into Egypt. And as I was thinking about what he was doing with landscape, sort of shifting the perspective from topographical map-like to like a almost like a plein air perspective, but not really because he's collapsing all this space. I started becoming interested in this kind of allegory that he was repainting and its significance. So that's how I found it. It's kind of random. Um, and from there, I started making works that were really about the relationship between Mary and Jesus, mother and child. I, at the time, had my second child, who was an infant then. So I was thinking and experiencing this kind of shape shift of myself and also a kind of surrealism in my experience of time, um, that was happening through my infant. So the works I was making that were to do the rest on the flight, to do with this allegory, were to do with specifically their relationship and actually not the landscape.
It's really great that you just mentioned the sort of surreal feel of time. And just because, I think we're all aware of the ways in which, because of clocks and whatnot, especially digital clocks, time is presented as so consistent, right? It's like 60 seconds, it changes and so forth. But the feeling of time is so different. Um, you can have even like a 20-minute rest or a nap or something, and it feel like hours that somehow you're just on the other side of it so much like lighter and time kind of just expanded. Or you can have one and it just went by so quickly. And how is that 20 minutes, right? And the same thing happens in situations with people. And um, it's I mean, I don't know whether that's like technically or whatever surreal, but I don't really care. I'm just thinking of the way in which time is fluid in that way. Um, and I guess I'm just wondering if that like corresponds to what you were thinking of, or um, why that sensation of time became something interesting or a thought vis-a-vis this topic and so forth.
Hmm. It's a good question. Well, I guess, I've made time-based media my whole career. And so I've always thought about time as inflecting on the meaning of something. Like if you hold on a shot for 10 seconds or 10 minutes, it's a totally different shot. Um, so just to say, like, time as meaning uh, as a material in my work is something that's just like, yeah, I think about it a lot. Um, but with painting, or specifically with this moment with Mary and Jesus, I think I was thinking more about it in the way that you're describing that as a mother, your sense of time is so shaped by your love for this other person. Your sense of self becomes externalized into another body, or in a way, your sense of self externalized into this other thing. And it can feel like 3 months, like the period after you have a newborn was like a day. It can feel like 12 hours is like 200 hours, like yeah, I guess if you're kind of speaking about this mechanized time and the way that we experience it, the way that Jonathan Curry has talked about it is like, um, de-emoting our experience of time. Becoming a mother is the inverse of that. Your experience of time is like fully emotional. Um, so yeah, it just felt like honest for me from my own perspective to want to make work about that.
Totally. It's also something you include in the titles. And I really enjoyed that in this funny way where like I walked in around 3:30, which I probably wouldn't have into the gallery, I mean. Which I maybe wouldn't have thought of so concretely, except that I was in front of the one with a title that indicated 4:30 in the afternoon. And so I had this sort of moment of like looking at the painting and thinking about like, does my time in this moment look like that? And there's others that are like closer to 3 p.m., but just for some reason, because I was standing in front of it, I was thinking about that. And I was wondering why you picked, I mean, because they're really like specific times that you included in the titles, and in part because you are a time-based media person. I was sort of thinking maybe like you were thinking of these times or had selected them for particular reasons. Was that the case?
Yeah, I mean, initially I thought, and I continue to think of the works as sort of depicting one day, like they're resting there, and it's ambiguous how long. There's not like, I don't know.
Okay.
One said they were there for an hour, or they were there for a week, but I thought, okay, like let's have Mary resting there for a day.
She
Um,
might need that at this moment.
what's that?
She might have needed that at this moment.
Yeah, let's have her there for a day. Let's have like everything sort of paused, and so I was also thinking about like, well, just how much one could experience in a day, maybe looking at sitting in one spot and just turning like this or like this. That's how I imagine the perspective in the paintings. So putting a kind of specific time frames both aligned to the light, like the way that the light is changing throughout the day that is reflected in the paintings, but also maybe just grounded us like that we're a real person in a real space. Yeah, so maybe it's also a little bit about embodying Mary.
Mhm. Um, it's wild because I just realized that even knowing that it was like sort of, you know, a kind of amorphous day or something, I did have this sense of movement, right? I actually, of course, it's the rest. Like they're in one place, but because, as you said, like there's these different sort of depictions in them. Um, I was actually sort of thinking of them as sometimes in different places, right? As if they were moving. Um, and Well, okay, I'll get back to that in just a moment. I guess I wanted to ask, like, where did you pull the light from, right? Since like the quality of light at different times of day varies depending on where you are in the world. And I know you started thinking about this in Brussels. Um, you're based here in New York, but like in the New England, but you also travel. Were you pulling light from a particular
Yeah.
context?
Yeah, I mean, so I should say like in 2021, I made those works. And then since then, I've kind of been evolving them, different interpretations of different other painters' works, and then also not. These I really set in a kind of northern Westchester imagined landscape. And I pulled from both my own, I grew up in northern Westchester. I live in New York now. My own like memories and photographs actually of the landscape I grew up in, and also like Hudson River School, which is different. Obviously, it's Hudson River School light paintings. Um, so yeah, these are all like specifically New York located. That was the idea.
Um, I guess now, just because I feel like landscape has always been really important to you. Is that fair to say? Yeah. Um, and these are, it's one of the things that's really striking is that the story revolves around these two people, right? And a lot of the paintings that even I just listed, or even as you were describing them, have these people, right, that really are prominent figures in these depictions. Uh, but we really get the environment in these paintings. And I'll just share, if I may, for a moment, like, because I want to ask you more about the landscape and like um, like what, why that became the crucial part for you. Um, but I always loved landscape paintings as a kid, right? So like when I had to go to museums or so forth and like walk from room to room with parents and adults and that kind of thing, I always enjoyed sitting in front of landscape paintings because I felt like I could just sit there and sort of my mind could roam, right? Like I could just sort of imagine what was around the corner, or what was behind that tree, or imagine, I don't know, it was like make believe land for me. And so it was much more freeing for me in that sense than like many of the portraits where there are these people and they did things or they represented things and often very like concrete um, and so with these landscapes, I really wound up having a similar sort of like floating kind of imaginative experience. Uh, and since landscape has always been so important for you, I just was wondering if you would just share a little bit about like really depicting these and why that became such a focus and especially in the context of a story that's so much about people and letting the people kind of fade.
Yeah. I mean, so one thing I think a lot about, I mentioned this like a little bit briefly before, is like perspective.
Mhm.
And I don't mean like depth of perspective in painting, but like POV, like who's looking and who's making. And I in filmmaking and in writing, so much of it is like which voice are you in? Who are you? Whose perspective are you in? The camera is framing someone's perspective. Is it the director's perspective? But it's the director embodying the feeling and voice of one of their actors, or yeah, anyway. And I think sometimes paintings occupy a perspective, but often in the language of painting, the perspective is the painter or the artist. Um, and in these, I wanted to, I guess, take a kind of lens approach to making a painting, which is like, what does it mean to look at the landscape as someone else?
Mhm.
And so in these, I'm they are the landscape. They are depicting a tree, a bird, the sky, the ground. But more than that, for me, they're actually depicting Mary's experience of motherhood. Um, and that comes from this idea of taking a character or a figure and lending yourself to imagine what they might be seeing. Um, so I guess that felt like a way of making paintings that felt cinematic to me, or the way that I think about cinema. I think that also is relevant to how I dealt with what's blurred and what's in focus.
Mhm.
Um, you know, for a long time, it's kind of like hard to justify painting in a world of photography and all kinds of other things. Um, and I thought, like, well, what can a painting do with a perspective that a photograph can't do? And one thing it can do is sort of play with the way a lens works. So in some of these, like, rather than I don't know, something in the foreground being in focus and the background being a kind of flat bokeh space, the way you might have with a long lens, I was able to kind of like do what I wanted. Like, no, I'm going to pull this thing out and this thing's going to recede back. And this thing, yeah, I mean, in a basic sense, that's what I think painting can offer against, let's say, what a camera can offer. Uh, Again, this kind of subjective relationship to expressing perspective.
Totally. So many things I want to ask about, but I
Yeah.
guess I'm just wondering, um, I mean, for me, the blurring is so beautiful, right? Like even as we see it here, like it's just this really, it felt very soft. Also, I should just mention for anyone in the audience who hasn't seen them, these are really intimate, right? The size is in each of the sort of descript, like the tombstone information, as it were. Um, but so that they're quite small. You have to get up close to them. And so I really actually wound up thinking a little bit about what it must have felt like, especially because I know you've worked really thoughtfully with material in filmmaking. And just the making something so blurry is not the word because blurring suggests like um a focus on some object, and it felt like it was more affective. um were these also in that sense feeling like the times of day are light, but is it also a kind of feeling? Is it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's like a feeling of like in the most cliche way, like romantic sublime kind of way. It's like projecting your emotions into nature. It's like cliche, but I mean that's what you do in storytelling. You pull things out to express how you feel, and I feel like something about the landscape that I'm really drawn to in a way is its ubiquitous kind of it's kind of means nothing. I mean, of course, it means nature, and in this case, I'm pulling something from an allegory that also means something in the history of the Bible and culture at large, let's say. But also, nature kind of means nothing. Like it can mean whatever you want. And an object, like if I were to, paint, let's say this over and over again or whatever, it would be like, what's that glass mean? Like, what's she really like doing with it? Why is there that much water and not that other amount of water? I think we're so acculturated to like looking at landscape paintings, like you were saying, as a kid going through the museum, just like to look at a vista, that it's a really nice screen to project a state, and just sort of in a way exist in that raw state, without, I don't know, I don't, without thinking, maybe. That's sort of what I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
Making them, sort of getting away from thinking.
Right. It's that kind of imaginative play that I think is that feeling that I had as a kid where like it didn't have to be something I could just sort of roam, you know? Um, I
Yeah.
guess,
And yet you know it's something because we know so much about like the horizontal plane and we know that this equals like the sky. I mean, actually, like if you put like red and then blue you would just know, oh, that's a landscape. Like it's so obvious. I don't know. Yeah.
yeah. It's I guess, you had mentioned earlier, that there's this particular way you think about cinema. Um, and then it was when you were talking about landscape and something, but just because we're kind of grounded in, how that informs um, part of where you've been at in the making of all of these, I'm just wondering, and I know it's a huge question, but like besides like the lens, right? Like how do you think about cinema? Like what is that?
Um, what do you mean? Like how do I think about shooting something or how do I think about do you mind?
Well, okay, good point. So, like, what I'm just sort of wondering is because storytelling is a part of um is a part of this series, it's also like you've sort of situated um if I may, like Mary as the protagonist, where like we get to sort of be in her view,
Hmm.
right? Um, and you were talking about the sort of shift of like what is it that painting can offer that photography doesn't. And you'd said, because of how I think about cinema, I was thinking about what could painting do? And so I was just wondering, like, what was it that you meant when you said how I think about cinema? Um,
Oh, okay. Well, I just have like a certain preference for how, like, I love long lenses. I love the feeling
oh,
of a kind of theatrical space in real space.
mhm.
Like, like the character is sort of cut out from the background and the background becomes their template or something. I just love that. So I guess that's what I meant. Like that's that relationship between foreground and background photographically is something I think about. Um, and also, I mean, this sounds kind of dumb in a way, but I also think about like backlight a lot. I love silhouettes. I mean, these are just things I'm attracted to in film. And a forest, a sheath of forest with the sun is like a perfect stage to think about both the foreground and background that I'm talking about, but also like stage lighting. Like the sun is the set light that can kind of become this background uh, that anyway that can become a kind of silhouette lighting, which is something else I'm into. So I guess I was also making the paintings in a way was also an excuse to play with conditions of camera lens quality and conditions of light that I just love and love to indulge in, basically.
Totally. Okay. Um, it's I think it's one of the things that has really in the past you've also talked about like the landscape as being able to way to sort of produce a kind of enchantment. Um, and I think that really resonated with me with these paintings. There is a sort of enchantment sensibility to them, um, which was startling, I think, in part because, of course, if I think about the official story of the different story that you're telling, it's a very stressful story having to flee someplace, right? Um, and I think, yeah, especially like right now, we hear those stories a great deal as people are having to flee various places and whatnot. And yet there is this enchantment. There's this feeling of enchantment, I should say, that the images, like the paintings, produce. Um, as you like, what was that aspect of it for you across the different times of this day of rest? Since um, that is a sort of consistent aspect of them. There isn't like a moment where it suddenly becomes not like dark or, I mean, nighttime aside.
I mean, there's like one painting that we were just on. If you so there, I mean, yeah, there's like some tumultuous states of being, but um, yeah, I mean, I think I was trying to impress on this kind of like there might be they're being hunted and they're on the run, but as is in the allegory through time, like time and space stops for her. It's why the tree bends down for Joseph. It's why the plants grow at her feet. It's why the water stops moving. It's why the the wheat grows. And so I do think she's kind of like nothing is more important to her in the world in that moment than her child and caring for her child. And there is an enchantment, a kind of primal enchantment in that. Um, so yeah, I guess I was in a way trying to communicate that. You know, there's that thing where it's like these landscapes are based on New York landscapes. Um, but yeah, I mean, she's seeing something else in the moment. And it's to do with also like this rest, this kind of slowing down and being able to see within the moment this kind of like fantastical light, this kind of I thought of the blurring also as a kind of like a slow motion. I mean, normally we experience slow motion, everything is in pure high definition. Um, like that's like the whole thing. You slow it down and you see every frame. But here I was thinking more like, is she seeing the way that like light is inflecting and changing forms? Um, yeah.
Well, if it's all right, what was it like to make these paintings in the context of also having two small children? And it sounds as if you were also going in and out of these sensations separately from the studio, as it were. So what was it like to move between that experience for yourself and then moving through that experience as an artist?
Hmm. I mean, it's so interesting because my time is so regulated as a mother. Like, I think we were just talking about this today before the Zoom that my kids are on spring break right now. So I don't like run them back and forth to school every day. I mean, my time is, as for all of us, like so limited and so segmented. It's actually the complete opposite of what I'm expressing in the paintings. It's like, okay, I'm going to put on a timer. I have an hour right now. See how much I can get done. Okay, after bed, see if I can get a little bit. They're also tiny, so sometimes I would bring them home and work on them on my kitchen table after bedtime. Like if I was just doing a little area, like bring a few things or so it's really kind of the inverse of this. It's like having no time at all, basically. So yeah, I think of them as kind of like making them as something maybe a little bit athletic about the process in that way.
It sounds like it was also a way to touch into that experience when it wasn't available in the actual day-to-day life.
Yeah, there's actually yes, I think that's true. At least one of these I was touching up on my kitchen table with my kids running around. So yeah, I don't know if it wasn't available in my day-to-day life, but you know, I think art's supposed to transcend our day-to-day life. So
Yeah.
trying, yeah.
I've thought, um, it's funny how, just to go back to the notion of landscape for a moment, like, because landscape painting, I should say, right, um, is stilled, right? Like it's this sort of still moment. But of course, landscapes are so um not mobile, maybe animated, right?
Mm.
There's like when you're looking, when you're, walking through a forest, or when you're walking, out in the countryside, even on like along on, sorry, that's my cat. Um, Along the side of the road, and there's fields, things are moving. Um, and but they're also grounded, like the trees are grounded by the way, like they're rooted in the earth or something. So there's this really interesting sort of play between animate and inanimate that occurs, which came up for me a little bit when I was looking at these. And I guess because you do have this background of spending time out in different, like non-urban environments and whatnot. Um, and because film, it also has a sort of interesting relationship between animate and still. Um, Whether you were sort of thinking, like in this particular painting, like, things, the blurring can make it seem animated, right? But there's also this sense of, because it's a landscape, sort of our brains clocking into inanimate, as if like that's the way we're supposed to see it. How were you like when you were making these? Was the environment an active place for you, or were you like, especially because of the rest, were you thinking of it as slowing down and becoming inanimate?
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I love that idea of slowing down and becoming inanimate, like sort of, yeah, becoming a kind of like observing object or something. Yeah, maybe something like that.
Hmm.
Um, but I will say because yeah, I think that's right. I mean, because other than the frame of sort of thinking about these paintings from a particular perspective, I'm imagining sort of playing with lenses to make that perspective come alive, translating that play of lenses into this particular landscape that's sort of like transposed into the landscape of New York, a landscape I know, a landscape where I have children. Other than kind of like those sets of frames and then making them really small so I can move them around easily, and and the ratio feeling maybe related to the screen in some way. Other than like those sets of conditions for the works, I kind of let myself do whatever from there on out. And I think also for me, that's like that kind of play and doing whatever within that is quite important. Because at the same time, like on the other side of this, I'm like writing a script, or I'm working with a kind of different register of storytelling in my brain. So I kind of try to separate those things out, and I don't know how else to say it, but like not put too much here, just sort of the conditions that we're talking about.
Totally. Um, it's the story. I guess I'm suddenly thinking about the story again. And maybe because of the filmmaking thing, like you've spoken about storytelling a lot, right? Like there is a story that you're drawing upon. Um, but I'm wondering, like, for you, is there a story here, or is it a set of conditions of feelings, right? Like, are viewers like getting a story from these works, or are they feeling a sensation, if that's clear?
Yeah, I think it's about occupying a sensation. Um, I think about in a larger sense of like what art can offer us, and I was saying before, like a kind of maybe we can get a little transcendence from it or something. I think there's something also in that, in terms of what like a visual object or a painting can offer us, because we might just glance at it, walking past it, doing 5 million other things, like with a low attention span. It might just exist in our visual field. And it's like for that 3 seconds, I think that's the average time someone spends looking at a painting. Like what kind of ulterior reality can this like puncture through for us? What kind of like other way of seeing something can this offer that maybe can then inflect back on how we're experiencing what's around us in that moment? And so I think in terms of storytelling, like these aren't telling a story. The story is the story. Mary's sitting there and she's looking around. And anything further than that is just like a kind of visual sensation that might offer you a different or heighten your senses for your own experience of your landscape that you're living in right now or something.
Yeah, I was sort of pulled in two directions, and I'm wondering if one of them um was more where you intended. On one hand, I was I think about the environment a lot in the context of the global climate crisis, right? It's kind of hard to miss. And there are environments that mean so much to me, and in my mind, I sometimes go to them for points of solace while I live here in New York and run around doing a million things, like you said. Uh, and so this way of, besides this kind of initiating narrative, like it just like this body of work kind of being about this is where we are, like look around, like take care, right? In both senses of the term. And then on the other hand, I was thinking about how with so much messaging coming at us all the time, um, one of the things that I think painting really offers is a way of stilling us, right? Because of its ambiguity, and like all art can be ambiguous, right? But it has this um, particular way of sort of just there was a slow art movement maybe like a dozen years ago or something, right? And the way in which, apart from all the messaging we need around all the things we need to do to make the world a better place, in order to do those things, we also need to be able to rest, right? We need to be able to just take a breath, um, and let the eye sort of soften. And so in contrast to the sort of like on one side, like making us attend to the environment, right? The other side is like, you don't have to think about anything. Just rest. And I was sort of pulled in these two different directions with this body. So I was just wondering if one of them was more present for you now that it's completed or while you were making it.
Well, there's a very much embedded in the history of landscape painting is the history of the destruction of the landscape. Like even when I mean, well, it was already happening when Padnier was painting, but I, my most recent show at Gladstone, before this show, I showed a work called Enclosure, which is a film about the enclosure movement, a moment in British history that lasted for hundreds of years, but I was focusing on the 1500s and 1600s in the film, when the landscape was being divided up, formerly common land sold off privately, forests being burned. There was a huge refugee crisis. I actually came to the subject because I was reading Shakespeare's a biography on Shakespeare, and it described him traveling from Stratford upon Avon back to London, back and forth every few weeks, and experiencing like all these people on the road. And I was like, what are all these people on the road? And then that kind of, I pulled that and learned all about this massive upheaval of the landscape, which then inspired, I'm going on a tangent here, but like Henry VIII and whatever, King Lear and all kinds of stuff. I mean, sorry, not Henry VIII, King Lear, and a lot of works that Shakespeare wrote, kind of the underlying thing is about property division. But we're also seeing it in painting at that time and much later. I mean, when he was writing, landscape painting in England essentially didn't exist. It was all just portraits and still lives for status. But as the land gets broken up and repossessed and privatized, landscape painting emerges as a function. And in the show at Gladstone that we did several years ago, we loaned British landscape painters like works from Constable and Turner and Joseph Wright of Derby, who in very different ways, I mean, Constable and Turner couldn't be more different, and Joseph Wright of Derby more different as well, and Samuel Palmer, but at the same moment are coagulating around this kind of drilling into the landscape and in a way, a kind of mourning of what's being lost. When we look at the Romanticism of Turner, we look at this kind of fantastical agrarian folksy work of Palmer, or we look at the kind of socio-Marxist, in a way, many have interpreted work of Constable, we're like, oh, like then it was good or something. But they were all painting because it was not good. It was the height of industrialization. It was gone. It was going. So I guess what I'm saying is embedded in the history of landscape painting, which is a recent history, at least in a kind of Western time frame. It's really linked to the destruction of the environment and industrialization. I don't know what that means in terms of making these paintings now. All I say is that I think it's a farce to imagine landscape painting as something that is not a kind of image of mourning to a certain extent. That's what they are.
Yeah. There's a great collection of essays. I think it was like I want to say the very end of the 1990s, edited by W.J.T. Mitchell, called Landscape and Power, that actually speaks to the whole notion of landscape is an imperial project in the sense of, and what's interesting about the set of essays is like the construction of landscapes and the notion of landscapes is something produced around the world as a way of establishing, like, this is the way things are supposed to look, according to me, this powerful figure, and gets reinforced in these different ways to speak to what you're saying. It's also like interesting. I had been thinking about the fact that a lot of this moment from like 500 some years ago that you were in this previous project is also a moment when there's this sort of flurry of paintings of this very topic of your body of work. And the story itself doesn't really become that. I mean, it sort of starts to arise in the 12th, 13th century. And then all of a sudden in the 1500s, you start getting these paintings of it. And an increased interest in this moment of the rest. And so I didn't know if that had also been a link for you.
Yeah, but what's interesting about the landscape and all those paintings is that it's serving a symbolic value. It's serving to inflect on the power of Mary, Jesus, and Joseph. It's serving like a literary value. It's not about a kind of romanticism or a sensuality of what the landscape is, separate from people. In a way, it's like in pure connection in that moment.
Yeah. Is it, do you think that's possible? Do you think it's possible to appreciate separate from the human?
Well, I think that like at least let's say like 19th century landscape painting on is about this, well, many things, it's about a million things, but let's just say like the idea that you would look at something and there wouldn't be a person in it, or the people are small and the other thing is bigger, is kind of saying like, this is bigger than us. This is outside of us. We are not possessive of it, while at the same time, of course, economically, politically, socially, absolutely the opposite was happening. So I don't know. I mean, no, I would say intuitively no, but I don't think that that's what, the idea of painting the landscape is about.
having done this body, like what did you take away from this that is maybe informing either future projects or things you've been thinking about or things you decided to start reading or seeing, whatever, I mean.
Well, I don't know. I've been on a kind of Robert Altman kick recently, which really has nothing to do with these paintings whatsoever. But I will say that, I mean, one of the amazing things about him as a filmmaker that everyone knows, this is just obvious. I'm not saying it's just like, yes, he said it about his films as well, is like he's embedding you in a real world, in a real time, in a real place. It's all fictional, but the feeling is about making it feel real on every level. And so much of the way that he's able to do that, how he constructs that, is through picking up on just what's around, sort of like and creating characters that feel like they're just around. It was a kind of, revolutionary at the time, but a complete inversion of background and foreground, like rather than having two main characters, he has 24 main characters, and you follow them in a kind of weaving around each other. And so I think that, his films are environmental. I don't know what that means in terms of me painting landscapes or not, but I will say that, like, yeah, I'm interested in that, this kind of reduction of the subject and enhancement of what's around. Um, yeah.
Uh, that's lovely. I hope we can all cultivate more of that in some sense. Um, do you think you want to make more paintings?
Yes, I do. I have some sort of like extending ideas for how to sort of deepen the subjectivity of these.
That's great. What's it like to move in and out of painting and time-based media work? Because I know you're also always thinking about that and or work, as you said, like working on another project. So like moving back and forth between that, how do you think that'll feel? Or how did it even feel as you were doing it in these last few years?
It feels like a kind of uh energy shift, you uh like you're floating on one energy, and you put some of it here and you put some of it there, and you put some of it in a particular kind of narrative form and another one in a color form.
Hmm.
So it feels connected and experimental, like um I guess, for example, like choosing to respond to your question by talking about Robert Altman
Yeah.
is a kind of what's the word for it? Like a monad for the way that I think about painting and working on films. That, yeah, they're inflecting on one another, but I couldn't quite tell you how.
Um, I was also, I'll just maybe end on this. I was struck when I realized I was trying to remember why it was that I was familiar with this story. Um, and I was telling my father that I was going to have a conversation with you and about the body of works and so forth. And uh, he reminded me that I had to go to church a lot as a kid. And it's one of the points in the seven sorrows of the Virgin Mary. So this is like along with the crucifixion and some of the other things, but the rest is considered one of
Huh.
her sorrows. So somewhere in the back of my head, maybe I remember that from being a little kid and having to go to like school, church school and so forth. Because I certainly didn't consciously. But I was struck by the idea of it being a sorrow because like you and like having looked at the other paint, like I don't think of it as I think of it as like a moment of rest, like, whew, okay, get to like have a breathing moment. That seems like a positive, right? Um, and so I was just, but there's a tenderness to your paintings, right? There's a kind of maybe wistfulness, sort of as another word instead of the enchantment thing that I was talking about earlier. Um, I guess because in the context of making them as opposed to like some psychology or semiotics or something. Um, can you imagine why it's included as one of the sorrows?
Yeah, I mean, I think she's being like driven from her home and she's like starving and tired and traversing a hard landscape with a newborn. So I think it's like I mean, I don't know why exactly the rest is a sorrow, but like it's a sorrowful moment. Like she's alienated and um being exercised away from her. So yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think it's just the rest part that always sort of, I feel like that should be one of the positives
Yeah.
in this context of sorrow. Um, was it hard to make this body of work given how much fleeing is around us in the news and so forth?
Well, I guess this sort of gets back to what I was describing about coming upon the enclosure movement through the background, actually, of this biography of Shakespeare, which is that it was around at that moment and reshaped the landscape. So I think I feel, one of the things that feels, I mean, this is not connected to the paintings in any way, but I do feel that that was a moment in which public space was beginning to be eradicated. This kind of like common land, the idea of living in a kind of socialist way on was ending. Um, and I think we feel that more than ever now that we don't have common spaces. If I walk down the street in New York, I'm essentially in a mall. Everything is privatized by a company that, it's like a Starbucks. Soho is like literally an outdoor mall. Obviously, parks have always been regulated for their hours, but when they're open, when they're closed, whatever, that's not a new thing. But it feels like we don't really have public space anymore. Of course, the internet is not public. It's owned by many giant corporations. I mean, yeah, we literally learn our information through three different companies now. So I think I wonder about what it means for disenfranchisement when we have no commons.
On that note, I will turn it back over to the Rail team and their valiant effort to maintain a commons with the new social environment. Rachel, thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Charlotte, for this conversation. It's been such a pleasure to listen to. I have several audience questions ready to go, and I'll start with a question from Ariel in the audience. Ariel asks, it's so interesting to hear you talk about the oscillation of your thinking visually through a lens versus an imagined point of view experience of the character Mary in these paintings. I want to ask you what you thought about the balance of light and shadow in the paintings in relationship to divine presence, beauty, and fear. I notice an ominous quality to them and in the shadowy parts of the forests.
Mm. Oh, thank you for such a thoughtful, beautiful question. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's this thing about the silhouette that I sort of briefly mentioned before, but the idea of the backlight, which is kind of like a almost a cliche of divine lighting. Um, so I was definitely like thinking about that. Um, yeah, thinking about the divine and light, absolutely. And yeah, this kind of thing that I think is present in the forest in many of the paintings, at least from the 16th and 17th century, of Flight on the Rest into Egypt, that the forest does feel scary and dark and kind of symbolically is representing the unknown. And so I definitely was like playing with that. Like the forests are, yeah.
Josh had a follow-up question that's similar to that, so I'm going to pass the microphone to Josh next.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Charlotte, for that conversation. I was curious about something along similar lines in terms of the way that like danger is present in these paintings. Specifically, like I'm just imagining as like from these perspectives where these visual fields are presented in very like distorted or warped ways, how that suggests, a sort of primal instinct of like, oh no, there's something around me that I'm just not super aware of, or there it just signals some kind of danger. I think on maybe the same level as what you were talking about before with almost like this primal enchantment. And so I'm just curious about your thoughts on maybe the relationship between danger and calm as it relates to this series of work.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like being a mother is that feeling, this flickering between like a primal fear and a like serene, embedded time loss love. So yeah.
Thanks for that question, Joshua, and thanks for that answer, Rachel. The next question is from Samuel Messer. Sam, I'm going to give you the chance to unmute to ask directly.
Hey, Sam.
I think Sam's here as Eleanor.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, Sam.
Hey, Rachel.
How are
So
you?
I'm good, and you're doing so great. It's so good to see and feel. So looking at the paintings, I mean, I feel a lot of similarity to what we were doing at school. And there are a lot of parallels just visually, but I also wondered if you could just, as an older artist going back to painting, what you think, how you would talk about those paintings and what you still might think they had in them subtextually that are similarities.
Oh, thanks for that, Sam. I mean, it's true. Sam was my professor as an undergraduate at Yale, and I was making landscape paintings. Actually, it's so weird you say that because I'm remembering right now I was kind of obsessed with this view of a garden. And I would just paint this view over and over and over again. Much bigger, like these kind of huge things on paper, the size of our bodies now. But yeah, I guess I've been obsessed with painting a singular view over and over again of landscape since I was 18. And I didn't remember that till right now. Yeah, the difference being like then, I was like, I don't have a studio now. I mean, I'm in my studio right now, but I call it an office. Like it's just a desk and a coffee table. So the scale at which I'm working inherently has to be like zoop, like shrunken down. I just don't have my working practice isn't set up for the kind of like way that I was working when we worked together years ago. But thank you for reminding me of that.
Because I'll just say, because people will love this. My one most important job was someone told me I had to go up to your studio and tell you to be not such a mess because your paint was coming out from under the doors. And I remember just saying to you, just put everything at right angles to the wall and it'll look neater.
Yeah, I was very, I was like, yeah, just covered in my paintings all the time then. Yeah,
Anyway, congratulations.
thank you. It's quite different now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that question, Sam, and thanks for that answer, Rachel. The next question's coming from David. David, I'll give you the chance to unmute and ask.
Oh,
David,
hey Rachel. Um,
so
uh,
happy to see you.
Good to see you too. And it's really nice to hear you talking about your work as always. I was just wondering about I guess whether the paintings being something that you can do on your own. And at first I think I wrote individually, but maybe that's not really the important part. Maybe it's like more about like the lightness of it, something that can be improvised versus the kind of collective and preparation of like this like pretty epic cinema that you've been working on, like just movies and like they're all full force. Is that part of the rest theme as well? Or is that just a kind of side effect or like how it gets done?
I mean, it's so, yes, I mean, it gets done in all different registers because the first kind of layer of the process is developing the image that I'm going to paint, which is kind of, I think most painters, or not all, I mean, a lot of painters do that, which I do on through a combination of like Photoshop, printing out, redoing something over something else, scanning it back into Photoshop, Usually it takes me, let's say, 2 weeks or so for each of those. Um, and then I actually work with someone who helps develop the base layer of the painting. So like that image gets sent to them. They work on the base layer. And then from there, I work from there on the paintings. So it's kind of like a multi-step process that I don't think is so unusual to, yeah.
No, no, but it's like still,
Yeah, no. Pardon?
so definitely not about being individual, but there is still a lot of improvisation and storytelling in both forms.
I mean, yeah, I don't know how much, I think it is kind of about being individual because
Hmm.
I mean, it's collaborative. There's this multi-step process, but working on a film, you write the script, you work with actors, you work with a director of photography, you work with an editor, you work with producers. Everyone is offering their perspective on something and bringing it in, and it becomes sort of alive through the eyes of other people. So it's different in that respect. It's individual.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much for that question, David, and thank you for that answer, Rachel. Um, the next question is from an anonymous audience member who's wondering how long a single painting takes you.
They end up taking about a month from start to finish. But then they're kind of like crossing over. So I end up kind of going back or working on another one at a different point. So yeah.
Thanks for that question and thanks for that answer. And the last question's from me. I'm really curious. I loved at the beginning of this conversation when you were talking about rest and thinking about I'm curious about as you've been meditating on rest as a parent, whether bringing this scene into contemporary life has brought about some unlikely sort of any unlikely or surprising meditations on rest itself. Like I think about rest as sort of um, seized as much as anything by capitalism and by commodification and self-care, and it becomes in day-to-day life like another thing that you have to kind of think about in addition to everything else. And I see these paintings as also like kind of an alternative to that, like a continuation, a way to kind of return to syrupy time amid that sort of tendency in life to slot in rest with everything else. And so I just wonder kind of, were there aspects of rest that maybe you couldn't stop thinking about in day-to-day life, sort of as you were working on these paintings over broader spans of time, within the context of your own schedules and your own daily habits?
Um, I mean, I think it offers me that kind of syrupy time, to be honest. I think it gives me that. And I need that. Like I was saying about this kind of segmented time. It's like it's a way for me to access that. So it's kind of selfish. It's definitely selfish.
Yeah, it also feels really related to kind of the rest, the other meaning of the rest, or like that which remains, the after effect, or the thing that's like the surplus. It like I feel like the paintings and the way that they're warped and the way that they're blurred, like it's as much an insistence that they're bigger than the moment that they depict as it is that they're like I don't know. Do you think about them that way? Do you think about like emanation or the way that the paintings uh kind of go outside of the boundaries of their frame?
Yes. I mean, thank you for bringing that up because part of the scale I described is like, okay, it's easy for me to bring it home. I can do it in my small studio. It's like, it's physical in a kind of like easy way, let's say, like physically mobile. But the other thing is, I think like it allows for this kind of actual sense of expansion because they become like little windows or little I think the space can feel bigger because you can contain the whole thing in a single frame of view. I'm not describing it well, but I think there is something about like imaging a big thing small that makes the big thing feel bigger. Um, yeah.
For sure. And there's also
Yeah.
something really beautiful and poetic about the fact that because they are small, they traveled with you, like
Yeah.
while you're making them. And so they're like they've traveled these long distances.
I mean,
You know?
it's interesting because I've always done that with my work. I mean, David, we painted together in college and we're friends from college. Like I would always have like the big thing in my studio and then something I was channeling back and forth as a kind of, I don't know, addicted to constantly doing something, ADHD, whatever it is. But yeah, so I don't know. That's just kind of the way I've always worked. I think a lot of artists work that way too. Like a lot of artists have like their home studio and they're like that thing they're always doing that they can't stop. Yeah.
Thanks for those answers. And thank you to everyone for your questions today. That was such a pleasure. And thank you, Rachel and Charlotte, again, for today's conversation, which was a delight to listen to. And I also want to thank Demetria at Gladstone Gallery and Lucy at the studio for their support in preparing for today's event and providing those beautiful images. I'd like to thank the Tiger Foundation and the Marion Bolton Kippy Stroud Foundation, who sponsor the New Social Environment Program and make weekday conversations like this one possible. They also support our archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel and where this will be very soon. The Rail has been free and independent for 25 years. A donation directly supports us, our writers, our staff, and our operations. You can support our work at the link in the chat. And if you're free tomorrow at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation with Susan Dackerman, Suzanne Felsen, Anne Grinstein, Ellen Grinstein, Joni Moisant-Weil, and Jessica Holmes on the occasion of 60 years since the founding of Gemini GEL, a world-renowned printmaking workshop in Los Angeles. And as is real tradition, you can now all unmute and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for joining us today, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much for having me.
Thank you
Rachel.
so,
Thank
so
you.
much,
you
Charlotte
so
and
much.
Rachel.
This is
Guys.
fantastic.
Thank you
Thank you,
guys.
Charlotte.
Thank
It's always such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the show.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye.
Congratulations on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Wow.
Rachel.
Bye.
Go see the
Oh,
show, everybody.
hey. Thank
Go
you.
see the show.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Have a
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Rachel.
Honor. Thank you.
Thank you.